The night was quiet, but inside Sandra Bullock's heart there was no peace. She sat alone in her living room, her hands resting on her lap, eyes fixed on the faint glow of the city lights outside. The silence felt heavy, almost pressing against her chest. She had faced many storms in her life, but this one felt different. It was not about fame or the demands of her work. It was about the deep emptiness that comes when life takes more than it gives. Her phone buzzed softly on the table. She ignored it at first, but then she saw the name glowing on the screen. It was Keanu Reeves. She hesitated for a moment, not because she did not want to speak to him, but because she feared her voice might break. Finally, with trembling fingers, she answered. "Hey." Keanu's voice came, low and steady like a calm wave touching the shore. It was simple, but the sound carried warmth. Sandra closed her eyes. "Hi," she whispered, her throat tight. There was a pause. Not an empty one, but the kind of pause where someone listens deeply, waiting with patience. Keanu did not rush her. He never did. "You don't have to say much," he finally said. "Just know I'm here." Those words struck something inside her. In a world full of noise where people always wanted her to smile, to act strong, to hide her weakness, Keanu offered the opposite. He offered silence, respect, and presence. Later that evening, he came over. When she opened the door, the sight of him standing there made her eyes fill with tears she could no longer hold back. He did not ask questions. He simply stepped inside, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and pulled her into a hug. Sandra clung to him as though letting go would mean falling into pieces. Keanu held her strong. Not too tight, not too loose, but in a way that told her she was safe. His embrace felt like a wall against the storm inside her. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Her tears flowed freely now. For so long, she had been carrying the weight of personal struggles behind the mask of a successful actress. Few people ever saw her broken moments. But here, in the arms of someone who knew pain himself, she found the freedom to fall apart. As minutes passed, the storm inside her slowly began to quiet. She pulled back just enough to see his face. There was no judgment in his eyes, no demand for explanations. There was only kindness. "Why are you always there for me?" she asked, her voice shaking. Keanu smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both sadness and hope. "Because I know how it feels when no one is." Those words pierced her heart. She knew of his own losses, his own battles with grief and loneliness. And yet, here he was, choosing to be a source of strength for her. That night, they sat together on the couch. Sandra spoke in fragments, sharing pieces of her pain, while Keanu listened without interrupting. When she could not find words, he let the silence remain, never forcing her to speak. Sometimes he would place a hand over hers, a simple gesture that said more than any speech could. The hours passed, and the city outside grew darker. Yet inside, there was a small light, a fragile hope beginning to form. Sandra realized that healing did not always come with answers. Sometimes it came with presence. Sometimes it came with someone holding you strong when you were too weak to stand alone. And as dawn approached, she whispered, "Thank you." Keanu shook his head gently. "You don't need to thank me. Just let me be here." The sun slowly rose, painting the sky in shades of gold. And for the first time in many nights, Sandra felt that maybe she was not as lost as she thought. Maybe, with a friend like him, she could face the storms ahead. The next day, Sandra woke with heavy eyes, but there was a difference. She was tired, yes, but the weight on her chest felt lighter than the night before. When she walked into her kitchen, Keanu was already there, making tea with quiet focus. He moved gently, without noise, as though he understood that loudness had no place in healing. "You didn't have to stay," she said softly, her voice still rough from crying. He looked up and met her eyes. "I know, but I wanted to." There was no heroism in his tone, no attempt to make himself appear noble. It was just truth spoken with humility. Sandra sat down at the table and watched him. Part of her felt guilty for needing someone this much, but another part felt grateful that someone cared enough to stay. They drank tea in silence for a while, Outside, the world carried on, but in that small kitchen, time seemed slower. Finally, Sandra spoke. "Do you ever feel like the world only sees the strong version of you? Like you can't show weakness because then people will think you're broken?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Yes, but weakness isn't what people think it is. It's not failure. It's proof that you've carried too much for too long." His words sank into her heart. She realized how often she had forced herself to smile, to perform, to look perfect, even when she was crumbling inside. And now, for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Later that day, Sandra had to attend a small meeting with her team. Keanu offered to drive her. She almost said no, wanting to appear independent. But then she caught herself. Maybe strength wasn't always about doing everything alone. Maybe it was about allowing help when you needed it. When they reached the building, flashes of cameras and curious eyes greeted her. Paparazzi had caught on quickly. Sandra froze, panic rising. She hated this part of her life. The judgment, the gossip, the endless need for a perfect mask. But then, she felt Keanu's hand brush lightly against hers, steady and firm. He didn't say a word, but the simple gesture grounded her. She lifted her chin, walked forward, and felt his presence beside her like a shield. Inside the meeting, her mind kept drifting back to what he had said in the morning. Weakness is not failure. Those words replayed over and over, like a quiet reminder. That evening, after the long day ended, Sandra broke down again. Not as heavy as before, but with tears that refused to stay hidden. She told Keanu about her fears, the fear of being forgotten in Hollywood, the fear of losing people she loved, the fear of never being enough. Keanu listened with deep attention, his eyes steady, his body still. He did not offer easy solutions. He knew better. Instead, he said something that surprised her. "You are not meant to be perfect, Sandra. You are meant to be human. And being human is enough." She stared at him, her tears slowing. No one had ever said it that way before. People always told her to be strong, to be inspiring, to be unshakable. But he told her the opposite, that being human was enough. It was in that moment she realized why his presence mattered so much. Keanu carried his own scars, but he did not hide them. He wore them with quiet dignity, and that gave others permission to be real too. That night, as they sat side by side on the couch, Sandra whispered, "I don't know what I would do without you." Keanu turned his head and looked at her with the same calm strength he always carried. "You don't need to think about that. I'm here now, and that's what matters." His words wrapped around her like another kind of embrace, and for the second night in a row, she fell asleep, not in fear, but in the comfort of knowing she wasn't alone. But outside their quiet world, whispers had already begun to spread. The photos, the stories, the speculation, Hollywood was watching, and soon the weight of public eyes would press on both of them. They did not know yet, but a storm was forming. The storm came faster than they expected. By the third morning, Sandra woke to headlines flooding the internet. Photographs of her with Keanu outside the meeting building were everywhere. Captions twisted the story into something dramatic, painting her pain as gossip and their friendship as something scandalous. She sat on her couch staring at the screen, her hands shaking. The cruel comments from strangers filled the pages. Some questioned her strength, others mocked her tears, and many speculated about her and Keanu in ways that made her stomach turn. Keanu walked into the room with quiet steps. He saw the fear in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped. He didn't need to ask what was wrong. He had seen this world before, how it feasted on broken moments. "Don't read them," he said gently, taking the phone from her trembling hands. "But they're everywhere," Sandra whispered. "People are judging me for falling apart. They don't understand what I'm going through. They never do." Keanu sat beside her, placing the phone face down on the table. "Let them talk. They will always talk. What matters is what's real, and what's real is that you're not alone." His calm voice was steady, but inside Sandra felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. She buried her face in her hands. "I feel like I can't breathe under this pressure." Keanu leaned closer, speaking softly. Then let me carry some of it with you." Her tears fell again. No one had ever told her she didn't have to bear the entire burden alone. The industry had always demanded perfection, and she had always delivered. But now her cracks were showing, and the world seemed eager to tear her apart. Later that afternoon, Sandra decided she needed fresh air. They went for a quiet walk in a small park away from the city. The trees whispered in the breeze, and for a moment it felt peaceful. She looked at Keanu, who walked silently beside her, his hands tucked in his pockets, his eyes calm but watchful. "How do you do it?" she asked suddenly. He turned his head slightly. "Do what?" "Survive in this world without losing yourself." He thought for a moment before answering. "I don't try to be what the world expects. I just try to be honest, even if honesty makes me look weak. People don't always understand, but the right ones will." Those words hit her deeply. She realized how much of her life had been about proving herself, about being strong enough, successful enough, admired enough. Maybe the real strength was in being true, not in being perfect. As the sun began to set, they sat on a bench. Sandra leaned back, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can keep fighting this way. Sometimes I feel like giving up everything. Hollywood, fame, all of it." Keanu looked at her with steady eyes. "If you do, it won't be because you are weak. It will be because you choose peace. But don't make that choice from fear. Make it from strength." Sandra fell silent, thinking about his words. Maybe her story wasn't about giving up or holding on. Maybe it was about finding balance, learning to live without the constant pressure to perform. But just as she was beginning to feel calm, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't headlines. It was a message from someone she hadn't heard from in years, a person from her past who carried memories she had tried to bury. Her face went pale. Keanu noticed instantly. "Who is it?" he asked gently. She hesitated, her voice low. "Someone who once broke me more than the cameras ever could." Her hands shook as she showed him the message. It was short, but it carried the weight of an old wound reopening. Keanu's eyes darkened with quiet concern. "Then maybe it's time to face it. And if you can't face it alone, I'll face it with you." Sandra's chest tightened. She did not know if she had the strength to confront that past. But she knew one thing. She trusted the man sitting beside her, and that trust gave her a fragile, flickering courage. The night grew colder, the city lights glowing in the distance. A new chapter of struggle was waiting, one that would test not only Sandra's resilience but also the bond she shared with Keanu. The night felt heavier than usual. Sandra sat by her window staring at the city lights that blinked like distant stars. The message she had received earlier still haunted her. It was only a few words, but those words carried the power of reopening wounds she had buried for years. Keanu noticed her silence. He had been sitting across the room quietly watching, giving her space. Finally, he asked in a soft tone, "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Sandra hesitated. Her hands twisted together nervously. "It was someone from my past. Someone who once made me feel small, unworthy, and broken. I thought I had left that part of my life behind. But now they're back, reaching out as if nothing happened." Her voice cracked as memories flooded back. The harsh words, the betrayal, the loneliness that followed. She had hidden these scars behind her smile for years. Keanu leaned forward, his eyes calm but steady. "You don't have to face them if you're not ready. But if you choose to, you won't face them alone." Sandra looked at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't know if I can do it. Every time I think about it, I feel weak again, like I'm that same broken person from years ago." Keanu shook his head gently. "You're not that person anymore. You've grown, you've survived, and you've built a life despite the pain. Weakness isn't what I see when I look at you. I see strength that comes from surviving." Those words made her chest tighten with emotion. Still, fear clung to her like a shadow. The next morning, the world outside seemed to conspire against her peace. The headlines had grown louder, the speculation fiercer. Some tabloids twisted the story of her and Keanu into cruel lies. Others dragged up pieces of her past, reminding her of mistakes she wanted to forget. By noon, Sandra felt suffocated. "I can't take it anymore," she said, pacing the room. "Why can't people just let me live? Why do they enjoy tearing me apart?" Keanu stood in her path, his presence steady like a mountain. "Because they don't know the real you, and because it's easier for them to judge than to understand. But their words don't define you, Sandra. Only you can do that." She stopped, breathing heavily, her eyes wet with frustration. "But what if I'm too tired to keep defining myself? What if I just want to disappear?" Keanu stepped closer, his voice low and sincere. "Then disappear with me for a while. Not from yourself, but from the noise. Let's take a break from this world that doesn't know how to be kind." His idea surprised her. "You mean leave?" "Yes," he said simply. "Just for a while. Somewhere quiet, away from the cameras, away from the voices. A place where you can breathe again." Her heart raced at the thought. Could she really walk away, even for a little while? Yet something inside her longed for it. That evening they drove out of the city. The road stretched long and silent, lined with trees that whispered in the wind. Sandra leaned her head against the window, watching the world blur past. For the first time in days, she felt her lungs open with deeper breaths. Keanu drove in silence, his hands steady on the wheel. He didn't need to fill the air with words. His presence was enough, as it had always been. They reached a small cabin by the edge of a lake. The water shimmered under the moonlight, and the quiet hum of nature wrapped around them. It felt like another world, one without judgment, one without noise. Sandra stepped out of the car, her eyes widening at the calm beauty before her. "It's so quiet," she whispered. Keanu smiled faintly. "Sometimes silence is the best healer." Inside the cabin, the air smelled of pine and old wood. They lit a small fire, its warmth filling the space. Sandra sat close to it, watching the flames dance, her mind slowly untangling. But even in this peace, the past still whispered inside her. She turned to Keanu. "What if they come back? What if the person from my past tries to hurt me again, even with just words?" Keanu met her gaze firmly. "Then they will face me first, and they will see that you are no longer alone." Her chest ached at his words. She wanted to believe them, to trust that his strength could shield her. But deep inside, she knew this journey was not just about escaping. Sooner or later, she would have to face the shadows herself. That night, as the fire crackled softly, Sandra whispered, "I'm scared." Keanu reached over, gently taking her hand. "It's okay to be scared. What matters is that you don't have to face it alone anymore." For the first time, she allowed herself to believe him. Yet outside, beyond the quiet lake and the shelter of the cabin, the world was still waiting. And so was the figure from her past, whose return would bring challenges neither of them had fully prepared for. The cabin by the lake became a shelter for Sandra. In the mornings, she sat outside with tea in her hands, watching the mist rise from the water. The silence wrapped around her like a soft blanket, giving her space to breathe. But inside her heart, unease still lingered. She knew she could not hide forever. Keanu noticed the way she stared at her phone each day, torn between blocking the past and answering it. Finally, one afternoon, he spoke. "You don't have to open that door if you don't want to. But sometimes leaving it shut forever lets the fear live longer than it should." Sandra looked down, her fingers trembling. "I don't want to hear their voice. I don't want to feel that pain again. But maybe you're right. Maybe running isn't the answer." Keanu leaned forward, his tone gentle. "If you decide to face it, I'll be right beside you. Not to fight for you, but to stand with you while you fight for yourself." His words touched her deeply. He wasn't offering to erase her pain. He was offering presence, and that was more powerful than empty promises. That evening, Sandra gathered courage and opened the message again. The words were simple but sharp. "We need to talk. I made mistakes, but I deserve to be heard." Her stomach twisted. Part of her wanted to delete it. Another part, the part that wanted freedom, knew she had to confront this ghost from her past. "Let's meet," she whispered, her voice barely steady. Keanu placed a steady hand over hers. Then let's choose where and when on your terms. This time, you hold the power." The next day, they drove back toward the city. Sandra had chosen a quiet cafe where cameras rarely reached. Her heart raced with every mile. Memories she had pushed down clawed their way back up, words that had once shattered her self-worth, the betrayal that left her doubting her own value. When they arrived, Sandra froze at the doorway. Her past was sitting there, waiting. Older now, but the same face, the same energy that once made her feel small. Her chest tightened and panic rose, but then she felt Keanu's calm hand rest lightly against her back. No words, just quiet reassurance. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The first few minutes were filled with silence. The person across from her finally spoke. "You look strong," they said, almost like an accusation. Sandra's hands clenched under the table. Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to meet their eyes. "I'm stronger, because I survived what you did to me." Their expression shifted, as if they hadn't expected her to confront it so directly. "I was young, foolish. I said things I didn't mean. I want forgiveness," her heart pounded. For years, she had dreamed of hearing those words, but now that they came, they felt hollow. Forgiveness was not a gift to be demanded. It was something earned. "You don't get to ask for that just because you feel guilty now," Sandra said, her voice growing firm. "Forgiveness isn't about what you deserve. It's about whether I need to give it to heal myself, and I don't owe it to you." Keanu sat quietly nearby, his steady presence giving her courage. Her past leaned forward. "So you're just going to carry this forever?" Sandra shook her head. "No, I'm letting it go, but not for you, for me. I'm done letting you have power over me. This is the last time we will ever meet." Tears filled her eyes, not of weakness but of release. She had spoken her truth, something she never thought she could do. She stood, her hands still trembling but her voice steady. Keanu rose with her, giving a respectful nod to the person she left behind. Together, they walked out of the cafe into the evening light. Outside, Sandra's knees buckled slightly. Keanu caught her before she fell. "You did it," he whispered. "You faced them, and you didn't break." She clung to him, shaking with both relief and exhaustion. "I feel like a weight has been lifted. I thought I would never have the strength, but I did." Keanu held her strong, his voice soft but certain. "That strength was always inside you. I just stood beside you while you found it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sandra realized something important. The past no longer had chains on her. She was free, not because someone else gave her closure, but because she had chosen it herself. Yet, even in her freedom, a new challenge loomed. The world of cameras and critics still waited, louder than ever, ready to twist her story. And she knew that the next battle would not be private. It would be public and far harder to control. The next week began with flashes of cameras and the roar of voices. Sandra thought that after facing her past, things might grow easier. Instead, the outside world grew louder. The cafe meeting had not stayed private. Somehow, a photographer had captured her leaving with Keanu, her face wet with tears. The tabloids spun the story into wild headlines, inventing tales of secret drama and romance. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the magazine covers that screamed lies. Her hands trembled with anger. Why can't they leave me alone? Why do they twist everything I do? Keanu placed the papers aside calmly. Because chaos sells, but their noise doesn't change the truth. The truth is yours to hold. His steady voice soothed her, but the sting of public judgment cut deep. Strangers online spoke as if they knew her heart, mocking her pain, questioning her friendship with him. That evening, she broke down. "I'm so tired of being strong in front of the world. I fought my past and I won, but now I feel like I'm losing against lies. I don't know how much more I can take." Keanu reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady. "Then don't fight the world alone. Let me share the burden. I can take the noise, Sandra. I've lived with it too." Her eyes filled with tears. She knew his words came from experience. Keanu had been through his own storms of grief and public scrutiny, yet he had never lost his quiet dignity. The next day, Sandra was scheduled for a press event. The thought of facing flashing lights and endless questions made her stomach twist. She told Keanu she didn't want to go, but he reminded her gently, running will only feed them. Standing tall will remind them that you are more than their stories. With trembling resolve, she agreed. They arrived at the event together, and instantly the cameras swarmed. Voices shouted questions, cruel and sharp. Sandra, are the rumors true? Keanu, are you two hiding something? Why were you seen crying together? The noise was overwhelming, a storm of judgment. Sandra's chest tightened, panic rising. But then she felt Keanu step closer, his calm presence beside her. He didn't shield her like a bodyguard. He didn't answer for her. He simply stood there, his quiet strength flowing into her. Sandra lifted her chin, her voice steady though her heart pounded. I'm not here to feed rumors. I'm here because I have a life and a career, and I won't let gossip define me. The crowd buzzed, some impressed, others eager for more drama. But Sandra didn't break. She spoke with honesty, not rehearsed lines. She showed her humanity. And that honesty touched some who had only seen her as a celebrity mask. Afterward, when they finally escaped the flashing lights, Sandra leaned against the car, her body trembling. I thought I would faint in there, she admitted. Keanu looked at her, his eyes soft with respect. But you didn't, you stood. You spoke your truth. That is strength. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but this time they were mixed with relief. I only did it because you were there. If I had been alone, I would have run. Keanu shook his head gently. No, you would have found your courage. I was only the reminder. For the first time in weeks, Sandra allowed herself to smile through her tears. He had been her anchor, but he had also taught her to trust her own strength again. That night, as they sat together in the quiet cabin once more, Sandra whispered, "The world will keep testing me. I know this isn't the last storm, but if you stay, maybe I can keep facing it." Keanu placed a hand over hers, his voice calm and firm. "I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the wind howled across the lake, but inside the cabin the fire burned steady. The storms of the world might return, fiercer and louder, but something stronger was forming between them, something rooted in respect, resilience, and unshakable kindness. Yet, deep inside, both of them felt it. The greatest test was still ahead, one that would not only challenge their bond but also force Sandra to decide what she truly wanted from her life. The weeks that followed felt like walking through fire. Every day, Sandra faced the noise of the outside world, flashing cameras, cruel headlines, strangers who thought they knew her story. Some praised her for speaking honestly, others twisted her truth into something ugly. It seemed as if no matter what she did, judgment waited around every corner. Yet something inside her was different now. She no longer felt powerless. The confrontation with her past, the battles with gossip, and the weight she had carried for years had shaped her into someone stronger. It was not the kind of strength that came from pretending everything was fine. It was the strength that came from standing in the storm and refusing to break. Still, one night the pressure came crashing down again. She sat by the lake outside the cabin, her reflection trembling in the dark water. Her voice shook as she spoke. "I feel like I'm walking a thin line. One wrong step, and I'll fall. I'm scared that no matter what I do, I'll never truly be free from all of this." Keanu sat beside her, quiet as always. The moonlight caught the calm lines of his face. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. Freedom doesn't come from silence outside. It comes from peace inside. The world will never stop talking, Sandra. But you get to choose whether their voices define you or not. She turned to him, tears welling. "But what if I'm not strong enough?" Keanu reached out, taking her trembling hand in his. "You are. I've seen you face your past. I've seen you walk into the fire of cameras and still speak your truth. Strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about standing up again every time you do." His words wrapped around her like a shield. She leaned against him, letting his presence calm her storm. In the days that followed, Sandra began to make choices she had once been afraid of. She took breaks from projects that drained her. She set boundaries with people who only wanted her mask, not her truth. She began using her platform not just for movies, but for messages of kindness and resilience, reminding others that even the strongest faces carry unseen battles. The media noticed the change. Some mocked it, calling her fragile. But many were moved by her honesty. Letters arrived from strangers, thanking her for showing that even those who seemed untouchable could struggle and still rise. Through it all, Keanu never left her side. He wasn't loud in his support. He didn't try to control her choices or fight her battles. He simply stayed, holding her strong when she wavered, reminding her with quiet words that she was never alone. One evening, after a long day of interviews where she had finally spoken about her struggles in her own words, Sandra returned to the cabin with tears in her eyes. Keanu looked at her with concern, but she smiled through the tears. "I finally said it," she whispered. "I told the world that I am not perfect, that I have broken before, and instead of shame, I felt free." Keanu's eyes softened, pride shining in them. That's the truth the world needed to hear. Not the mask, but the heart. She took a deep breath, the weight inside her chest finally loosening. For years, I thought strength meant pretending I was unshakable. But now I see. Strength is letting the cracks show and still moving forward. The fire crackled warmly in the cabin, and the night was still. Sandra leaned her head against Keanu's shoulder, closing her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of quiet gratitude. Keanu shook his head gently. "You don't need to thank me. You found your own way. I only walked beside you." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the kind that carried more meaning than words. And as the night deepened, Sandra realized something powerful. Her story was no longer just about pain. It was about healing. It was about finding peace not in perfection, but in truth. And it was about the quiet strength of a friend who chose to stay when the world wanted to tear her apart. The storms outside would come again. The cameras would never stop flashing. The voices would always try to judge. But now, she carried a truth that nothing could take away. She was enough, and whenever fear whispered in her heart, she knew there would always be another whisper, stronger and steadier. A whisper of comfort, reminding her that she could stand because she was never standing alone.